Hello and welcome from me, Philip Nothard, and Curtis Hutchinson to this special Motor Trade Radio podcast brought to you in association with eBay Motors Group. And many thanks again for joining us in this 21st in our series of special interviews themed around sharing best practices during the challenging times we're having across the sector. Previous interviews with Suzuki boss Dale Wyatt, Mitsubishi MD Rob Linley, Sytner CEO Darren Edwards, and last week's chat with Ned Adley, who's the founder of Judge Service, are still available, plus many more on the Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify and SoundCloud and Deezer.
Today, we're delighted to welcome our special guest, Louise Wallis, Head of Business Management at the National Franchise Dealers Association. That's the trade body that represents the interests of franchise dealers and groups across the UK. So welcome to the podcast, Louise.
Yeah, hello and welcome. And I'm going to say welcome, which I shouldn't say. Yeah, it's great to be on, and this should be interesting.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you on the podcast, Louise, and it's also very timely as well because we're recording this on the 1st of September, which obviously is a key month for franchise dealers with the launch of the 70 plate. So thanks for joining us on what is a busy day for the sector. Now, we thought this would be a good opportunity to bring listeners up to speed with what's happening in the franchise sector by looking at new car sales, the impact of the lockdown on dealers, the growing talk of the return of the agency model, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your views on that. We've also got the impact of Brexit and the latest on block exemption, which expires in less than 2 years now. So plenty to chat about.
Yeah, there is. So welcome back, Louise. I mean, it's been a while since we've had you on the podcast, and I think that we can safely say that the sector's moved on a little bit since last time you were on the podcast, with lots of things taking place as Curtis has just gone through there. So let's start off with thinking about the plate change. I mean, indications as we've recorded this are that August is potentially marginally down. And you've probably got a view on that. But, talking about the plates change, we know there's already a lot of talk about September being a bumper month for the new car registrations, obviously as a result from the pent-up demand for new cars caused by obviously the lockdown and what we've been through. But what are you hearing from members of the NFDA about the September demand and how big an issue you think supply could be at the minute?
Yeah, I mean, the general sort of chat at the moment about the September market is that actually there's a lot of demand from consumers to buy cars. I mean, some of that is still pent-up demand coming through during the lockdown period, but also we were missing a very substantial number of cars at the end of March, so there will be people who will be wanting a new plate car who didn't get one in March and will be wanting one in September. I think the biggest dampener on the market that is potentially there will be supply. I think supply of the right cars will have some impact on the market. I still think the September market will be strong. It just could have perhaps be a little stronger if more cars were coming through, but that may well be a good thing for later in the year as we go into quarter four. So at the moment, fingers crossed, it will be pretty good.
And do you think that's, I mean, obviously with the last two Septembers we've been influenced by RDE in last year and WLTP the year before, which when we say August is potentially marginally down, I mean that's on the back of two strong Augusts due to the pull forward from the previous Septembers. But do you think it'll be? Do you think nowadays we need to look at August, September as kind of 2 months together now at the minute when he's doing some sort of comparisons?
Well, I think inevitably the months before the plate change will always be subdued because people will be thinking about taking the car the month of the plate change rather than before. And I mean, this has happened for years and years and years, and we have the same issue with February every year. So in some respects, yes, you do sort of have to look at the months almost together. And I'd never say we write off August because that's very unfair, but I think we tend to accept it's going to be a subdued month compared to the following month where people want the cars.
And following on from that, Louise, so we know that July was strong. August, as you say, could be subdued. September looks though it will be a particularly strong month. But where do you think this leaves Q4? Do you think that there'll be enough momentum in the market to give dealers a relatively strong Q4 after what has been, a particularly tough time for dealers?
I think there'll be a number of factors that will actually help the Q4. One will be vehicles that people were trying to buy in September and may not be able to take till October and November. So that will help the back end of the year and certainly Q4. I think there are a number of people who have money to spend at the moment because they will have decided not to take that foreign holiday because it's just too risky to go abroad at the moment and not have to quarantine on the way back. And I think people haven't been spending money, so there is money around that will help Q4. There are factors that are not going to help the quarter, particularly around employment and redundancy and the end of the furlough scheme. But I think on balance, I think Q4 will probably be okay. I don't think it will necessarily be a bumper Q4, but I think it will hold up.
And in terms of, the lockdown, it caused some casualties. Some may say those were casualties that would have happened anyway without the COVID lockdown happening in the longer term. But, it's created renewed talks of increasing consolidation. We know that some of the PLCs and large groups have been out in the market saying that they are on the lookout for opportunities if they present themselves that align with their strategy and portfolio of partnerships. But do you think the economic conditions caused by the lockdown and the impact of COVID-19 will accelerate consolidation in the fourth quarter of this year, but more importantly into 2021?
I think the general pattern is consolidation across the industry, and that was happening pre-COVID, as you say. And I think that will continue. There'll be a number of people, particularly smaller dealers and smaller groups, that may well decide that it's the best time to get out, and there's a good opportunity to divest of their interest in the motor trade, and they will get bought up by a number of dealer groups who have actively said that they are looking to expand and to augment their portfolios. I think there'll be some realignment as well. I think people will look at the franchises they've got and maybe concentrate on certain franchises and not others, depending on where they position themselves. So yes, I think there will be an acceleration of consolidation that has already been going on.
Now, I mentioned it earlier, Louise. Dash Gupta, in a recent interview in the press, said that he was in favour of an agency model for new car sales. And I know that Marshall operates an agency model with some brands. But he's saying that, in some instances, he prefers it over the current franchise model, citing in particular the sort of savings that a group would make in terms of stocking costs. So how prevalent is the agency model amongst NFDA members? And do you expect to see a move towards wider adoption?
At the moment, it's not the mainstream model within the industry. It's still the franchising model that we've known for many, many years that's ruled by the block exemption. But a number of manufacturers have looked at agency and are introducing agency models. And that may well get momentum as we go forward, because there are benefits for taking on that model, particularly for dealers, over things like stocking costs, as you say, and also over some of the standard issues that are there for dealers. And some manufacturers like the idea because they're not tied into the same franchising agreements that they would be with the current model.
That's interesting then. So it does work both ways. There would be advantages for OEMs, not just dealers. Yes,
the advantage for a manufacturer is that in many respects it's easier to get out of an agency model much quicker than having to roll out on a franchise. And it's not governed by a lot of the contract issues that you have in the same way with a franchise agreement. So for them it gives them more flexibility, which is the benefit, though there is the downside that they have to carry the stocking costs of the vehicles, which under the franchising model doesn't happen.
And I mean, in terms of the members of the NFTA, I mean, say the members of the NFTA, I mean, potentially you cover 97%, I think it is, or thereabouts of the franchise dealers in the UK. But is there increased talks around that agency modelling, and is it starting to gain some traction? And we say it's a sort of two-way, so there's some interest from OEMs as well as the franchise dealers. I mean, what's the rationale for dealers not wanting the agency modelling? Is it about profitability and control away from the OEMs? Is there a risk of does it challenge the potential relationship between the OEM and the consumer? In terms of the data and ownership, is there what are the conversations taking place?
I mean, one of the big issues is who owns the consumer in an agency model. So, because the manufacturer is effectively having a more direct contact with the consumer, then you do have the relationship between the manufacturer and the consumer, which you don't get in the same way with the dealer model. So you're losing control of your customer. So that is one of the bigger problems with it. It also tends to be a less secure model than the franchising model at the moment. And I mean, there's two ways of looking at that. In some ways, it's easier for the agency model to be broken, which can be of great benefit to some dealers who perhaps want to be able to have that flexibility. But it also means that when you've got levels of investment to put in, you actually want the protection of a contract that's in place and is harder to break. So the swings and roundabouts. It's to a certain extent what suits that particular manufacturer, more to what suits the particular dealer.
Moving on, Louise, there's two linked events coming up which will impact the franchise sector. So this year we have the UK formally leaving the EU at the end of the year, and we've also got the expiry of the current block exemption in May 2022. So firstly, how are franchise dealers preparing for Brexit? And also, what do you think will happen when the block exemption expires, and will it be replaced by a UK-specific domestic exemption?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's looking eagerly towards the end of the year and finally you're coming out of the EU in the way, or so that is, everybody is preparing. I think everybody is very much hoping that there will be a deal and that we don't have any issues with exiting. I mean, the hope is that the deal will mean that we will have tariff-free entry of vehicles from Europe and across the rest of the world as well, so that we don't have an uplift of 10% on the value of vehicles, which would be very damaging for the market. So, I mean, dealers are preparing the way for in case we have a problem, but I think everybody is optimistic that something will be in place that will make sure that there isn't such a cliff edge as there could have been. I mean, in some ways, the bigger issue potentially is the block exemption that will go in 2022 and 2023 when we lose the two block exemptions. These will be replaced in some format within Europe. And though, as everyone says, well, why does that affect us? Because we'll be outside of it. Dealer contracts still will be written in line with European law because most dealer contracts are European-based. But also the UK government will adopt something that will mirror what is coming into Europe, because that will be how we'll be able to operate and trade with Europe. So we have to take a huge interest in what is happening with block exemption, because it will still affect UK dealers quite considerably.
And is there lobbying going on at the moment that will shape the block exemption that comes into place in 22 and 23?
yes, there's a huge amount of lobbying going on, partly from us. I mean, we're having or have been involved in regular meetings within Europe to help shape what's going on and to influence what is happening. I mean, we are, unfortunately, the UK isn't necessarily seen in the best of lights in Europe, but we're working with other dealer organisations within Europe to formulate something that hopefully will help everybody. So that's hugely important. So that is going on. There's a lot of work going into that at the moment.
And we were talking just on that point before we started to record, but obviously the relationship between the early conversation around agency modelling and the block exemption changes. I mean, they are purely two separate challenges, aren't they? I mean, the agency modelling is potentially a change that's coming, and that's to the benefit, as you say, the OEMs and the dealers, both ways, depending on what they want. But is there, could the block exemption have any influence on that? Is it a case of those that represent purely UK businesses are at more risk than those that may have representation in some of the European countries, or is it very much separate challenges?
I mean, I think whether the agency model takes hold will be influenced by what happens with the block exemption. I think it will depend how well balanced the new block exemption will be in favour of the dealer or the manufacturer, or whether it is finely balanced between the two. And I think manufacturers will take a view on how they structure their agreements and their dealer networks dependent on what comes out of the block exemption. We will push for greater protection for dealers, and that's part of what our lobbying is at the moment. But manufacturers may see that, may find that not put to their liking, and that might well push different models out there.
And I don't know if you know, I mean, I don't know if you're aware, I'm not aware, but is agency modelling, is it, we're talking about it potentially gaining traction in terms of conversations in the UK, but does it happen more elsewhere in some of the European countries, or is it basically an OEM is moving towards agency modelling no matter what the country, or is it prevalent in other areas? Or I'm not sure if you're aware of that or not.
Not so much how it pans out in the automotive industry. I mean, agency model is quite widespread in other areas of business. It isn't something that's been prevalent within motor retailing because of the block exemption and the franchising model, but there are other sectors that do use the agency model to actually do business. So it wouldn't necessarily be a major change in that respect, though it would be a major change for the sector in the fact that we have been wedded to a franchising model for so many years.
And finally, I mean, you've mentioned obviously the lobbying that the NFTA are doing around the block exemption, and I think one of your messages at the minute is it's coming quickly, and there's been a lot of things recently, should we say, to take the focus elsewhere. But I know you're very keen on getting the focus onto the block exemption, because it'll be upon us before we know it. But is there any other campaigning that the NFTA doing at the minute and pursuing at the minute? And just to follow that up a little bit, and how would you describe the mood of the dealers in terms of a post-lockdown marketplace?
Yeah, I mean, as far as what we're looking at, I mean, one of the biggest challenges we've got at the moment, I think, is the issue over environmental issues, and particularly electric vehicles and the longevity of petrol and diesel. So, we've been heavily involved in lobbying around what happens, and with the deadline from government of 2035 on diesel and petrol. We're particularly keen to actually lobby to say that hybrid actually still has quite a major part to play in getting the green agenda over in cars, because at the moment the government seem very, very anti that, and it seems everything is pushed towards sort of full electric. But there's still a lot of hurdles with that, particularly with the public at the moment, particularly over cost and the infrastructure issues around it. So that's a very big piece of work we're doing, and we're also supporting that with things like EVA and the standards that go around that as well with dealers. So that's quite a major part of what we're doing at the moment. And then we're lobbying all the time on all sorts of other issues. I mean, coming out of COVID, we're doing some work on rates and how that is affecting dealers, and the government is now looking at what they want to do with rate reform. So we're doing work on that. There's a lot of work around finance and insurance going on. So yeah, we're busy involved in all sorts of stuff.
It was quite interesting. It was quite interesting. We were talking about the electrification at the pubs last week, weren't we? Was it Green? What were they called?
It was Green Kings. I don't know if you're aware, Louise, but there's a chain of pubs called under the Green King Brewery, and they're rolling out EV recharges. So they're hoping to have something like 900 on their sites by the end of the year.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I wasn't aware of that particular initiative, but it's the sort of initiatives that are really useful to have out there to get the public awareness, and also for them to have the security to know that they can get the car charged if they buy one. So it all helps the image of electric vehicles, and more to the point, the take-up of electric vehicles by consumers, because they know that they can get them charged, because that's been one of the biggest issues, that and range, of course. But cost is also the other big problem at the moment. So it's a growing market, and I expect we will see it grow much quicker over the next year or so.
And I mean, we touched on before, I mean, just saying about the mood of the dealers in terms of the post market. I mean, we were saying about obviously how resilient this sector is, isn't it? And I mean, there's always something. I mean, we'll finish with COVID-19 hopefully sooner rather than later. We've then obviously got WTO. We've then got block exemption. I mean, how would you describe? We said it, but are the dealers holding tight? Are they? Because a lot of them have been through a lot of challenges through the years, haven't they, and survived many times. What's your thoughts?
I think, dealers are extremely resilient, and I'm very confident that most dealers will find a way through this. I think generally, I mean, I wouldn't say that dealers are ecstatic about the situation, but I think most of them are realistic, and they know that there will be some tough times ahead over the next year or so. I mean, 2021 could be a difficult year for the economy in general, but I think dealers are quietly confident that they'll get through it. The first 6 months of 2021 may be a tough market, but they will get through it, and they know that things will get better at some point.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, again, thanks for coming back on the podcast, and we need to get you on more often, because I think there's the things that you guys are doing at the NFDA and some of the knowledge that you've got around particularly things like the block exemption and WTO, as we finally come out of the EU, and other challenges that some of these UK franchise dealers are facing. And you've obviously got good connections in that European market, so we do need to get you back on. But for now, thank you for that insight. Really useful, particularly around some of these conversations around agency modelling and block exemption that seemed a long way away a while ago, but it's pretty close now, and I think what you're doing on that is fantastic for the sector. So thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Louise, for what was a timely update on the many issues facing franchise dealers as we nudge towards the final quarter of the year. That's all for now. You've been listening to this special Motor Trade Radio podcast brought to you in association with eBay Motors Group. Please like and share on social media, as it's important during these times for the dealer community to work together and share experiences and best practices. Many thanks to you for listening and supporting the podcast. Philip and I will be back with the industry headlines on Saturday. Until then, stay safe and stay well.